How are we supposed to take the essence of life and all of the interplanetary mechanisms that surround us and be able to make sense of how to manipulate a focus into results that equal goals in this world? Stay till the end to find out. Welcome to the news. So the answer, in short, the short answer, which you can stay for and you can get just for the immediate part of listening to this podcast, is markets. Markets is the answer. But the longer term answer, you're going to need to stay to the end to find out how it is to be able to try to manipulate the world in this fashion by using this leverage of this single word, of this single tool known as markets. Well, welcome to the news. So what we're talking about today, in essence, is markets, if you can't tell, which has to do with just kind of the idea that, in essence, markets are something that are just like attuned to something that you're not necessarily familiar with, in a familiar way of putting it in a familiar sense. So the reason I talk about markets today is because markets have to do with everything in life, every single piece of data, every single piece of energy flow, every single statistic, every single conceptual thing that's measurable in all of humanity has to do with markets. Markets are what guide every single flow of the directions of all energy in this world. The only difference between markets is how things are conceptualized, how things are lumped together, how things are put together in a mentality, how things are grouped together in a certain specified way, so that in essence it's labeled with one specific label at the top of an energy set of data flow, or a flowing set of data that is labeled a name at the top of that label of a certain specific data flow. That corresponds to a market, and that can be anything. That could be literally anything in the whole entire world. But the thing that matters most around typical things that most people are supposed to sort of be forced to focus on is money, because the markets, the money markets, are what's at the forefront of every single thing in all of the world's functionalities on a day-to-day basis. And that's great and dandy and fine and grand and all these things, but in essence, when we realize that this is just the tip of the iceberg of, to say the least, of all the things that actually control the roots and the root networks of the mechanisms that relate to the way that the earth corresponds to spiritual finance and not traditional finance, if you will, that this is what is at the forefront of the new world in essence. It has to do with markets and being able to just focus on the combinations of different energy and data flow to connect the essence and the idea of what markets ultimately are, which is just transactions of energy flow after all. It's transaction of energy flow, transactions of energy flow that in essence make sense from one another by being stacked on top of each other, by then are having a certain theme that relate to them, that have influences on different impacts, and in impacts I mean on different aspects of the world. It's just kind of that simple. But the thing that relates to markets and marketing is marketing has to do with making things popular. In essence, the S&P 500 is the most popular of the marketing, if you will, that has to do with just things that are the most popular for a given year specifically. Like, that's the purpose of that. So the bottom line is that markets are like not exactly a popularity contest, but you could call it that, because ultimately the winners of the popularity contest like tend to be the S&P 500. And in that similar context, when it's realized that like the essence of focusing on specific vibes has to do with measuring vibes, measuring energy in the world. And when you do that, you create markets. Markets have to do with manipulating and influencing every single thing in the world. It's not just money markets, it's markets that have to do with energy flow of every single capacity. And that therefore informs how to invest money after all, because you're able to predict energy flow based on certain indicators and things of this nature. But markets have to do with something inside of your household, for example. It could be a small market, or larger things if you're like part of some similar, smaller or larger, or any size of communities. Those communities have energy flows, they have trends, and certain bets can be made on energy flow. And that has to do with markets. That can be scaled up to all kinds of different processes around the world. But it's necessary to be able to think of the whole world in the essence of markets, because then you can play your own game by making your own market trend data that in essence you follow to be able to try to make certain results. And it's kind of that simple, because you're doing small scale investing. High scale investing is you're trying to take money and turn it into other money. And so small scale investing has to do with trying to make outcomes with understanding certain markets that you're in, aka societies, aka cultures, aka schools, aka classrooms, aka groups at work, aka circles within groups at work, aka any of these things are certain aspects of data flow that have to do with trends, they have to do with people, they have to do with people acting a certain way on a consistent basis that relates to certain trends. You know what certain people are going to say at certain times, what's going to come out of their mouth necessarily because they've said it a lot of times, and these kinds of things are indicators as to sort of future data that could conceivably repeat itself, and that therefore allows you to therefore predict it in this certain fashion. And this has to do with spiritual finance sort of as a whole, because everything is markets. Everything can be broken down into little bitty markets, and there's nano-sized molecules. There's like anything that's alive has to do with markets, because it has to do with commonalities, it has to do with groups, it has to do with statistics and trends therein, and therefore markets are everywhere and they're everything. So markets is what relates to marketing being such a viable and interesting tool that has to do with also the ability to manipulate certain growth of certain items if you have certain audiences that might gravitate to and be able to connect demand and supply. If you have demand and then you connect supply that speaks to the personality of specific demand per se, that could relate to sales in a significant growth number potentially. Like if something costs X, Y, and Z and you can sell it to 1 million people, then that cost per the cost of each sale can be scaled up significantly versus like spending $1 in the stock market and trying to get like $4 over like 4 years, for example. Trying to make 400% on your money in 4 years is not it's an amazing return in the stock market, but marketing, that's just like, damn, like, yeah, marketing, it's a whole normal thing. It's a normal thing, for example. So anyways, the bottom line is that markets are everywhere. And if you are able to go small scale and you get into the private markets and just look at the world as markets, then it's like decomposing the world into spiritual finance. That's the whole purpose of this podcast, is because markets are everywhere. And the whole purpose of that is to be able to try to predict and make predictions on a smaller scale, to be able to scale up to the bigger markets, to be able to make trend calls, to be able to make influence calls on bigger market trends, and also playing your own game and making your own finance game. Because if you start with calling out true predictions of how people are going to act, what they're going to say, trying to bet on certain aspects of life, that therefore allows you to speak to other aspects of finance in the greater sense, like being able to make a business because you're seeing the trend of a specific business go and flow, and then therefore you can connect with people who can put the tools together to be able to make a process and call it a package, aka known as a business, and that therefore allows you to just be able to make money in this fashion. But getting the organization, getting the people together, getting the tools, getting the pipelines, and getting the processes so the energy flow is functional is a side process in a business, which is equally as important as the energy flow in of itself of the markets, of the market machines that you're trying to make to be able to try to increase value on specific items. Like just saying, in other words, if you can see trends coming, you still need to be able to harness that energy and have it come in one side of your business machine and have it go outside one side of your business machine, and have every part of that business machine be made from legitimate and functional and reliable and efficient processes and characteristics of that business machine, so that people can rely on a functional and a reliable experience, basically, because you don't want people working in your organization that are faulty and that have bad reputations and things of this nature, because that therefore will make it so that that business process cannot last necessarily. But the purpose of this process of this podcast is to be able to talk about connecting demand to supply, in essence, and just being able to acknowledge that markets are everywhere by breaking down the world into markets and trying to think in the form of markets. That's the name of this podcast game, in essence, is thinking in the form of markets. Thinking in the form of markets to be able to try to functionally get to know markets of all shapes and sizes, and also think in the form of markets, being able to just break down the essence of energy flow in any given capacity and trying to make predictions on that specific energy. And once you do that enough times, then you can take it into the realm of betting on money, and also betting on money, but at the same time betting in other ways that other people are not even trying, because you've been practicing in other certain ways that are so unique to yourself that it gives you an edge to your own edge and process and niche that makes you your own game. Basically, it makes you your own game in the greater market sense, but you have to play with small scale items and practice and just get reliability on the board of just certain things that you can bet on, so that in essence you can put people and places and processes and systems in place, so that in essence when you see market trends, when you see demand, being able to easily connect with supply because you're easily practiced and well versed at predicting trends, because you're so consistently seasoned at predicting small trends among friends, among family, among certain small markets, among cultures, among schools, among classrooms, among any given group that you might be spending your time or energy in, that you're surrounded by energy. That's the bottom line. Wherever you're spending your energy among other energy in this world, because this whole world is just energy. This whole world is full of energy. All this world is energy. So if you're just looking at certain pockets of energy, if you just draw circles around the world as you walk around in the world, you draw circles around the world, different circles all over the place, different aspects of things that you're thinking about, those thoughts, you draw circles around those thoughts. Those thoughts are markets. Those thoughts become markets because you draw those circles around them. And it's schools of thought, it's trains of thought, it's specific groups of thoughts, more or less. Those are markets. All of them are markets. It's market data, it's market information that's clustered into a specific niche that has been coined as the label of whatever that circle is that circled that market data or information, or any energy for that matter in the whole world. That therefore encapsulates it into the form of a market, into an ecosystem that can therefore be studied. Studying an animal that's a unique animal as a scientist, for example, is a market, because all the energy and the energy flow inside of that animal, for example, for any kind of animal studying scientist, is a market that they're studying. They're studying the market of the market trends of the energy flow within an animal, for example. So people are markets. Any energy flow in the world is markets. It's very interesting. It's very interesting to speak and say out loud, but being able to try to use that to everybody's own conceptual way of looking at everything is just an interesting way to start drawing circles around the whole world, around life, to be able to try to triangulate energy and be able to repurpose and understand that you can repurpose energy, and so then start to make small bets in the stock market, for example, and then start to make other small bets in the game of business, for example, by just predicting energy flow, seeing where energy flow is going to go, where monetary energy flow is going to go, and by connecting demand to supply, just connecting demand to supply, and seeing where that energy flow might best go one side to the other, where they might go in tune together, just like music sort of playing together, business music playing together. But in essence, we're seeing from markets and market experience just how harmonious that demand can connect with supply, more or less. And if you see that opportunity from just predicting markets and predicting market trends and predicting the future of certain energy flow of specific things, because you're using past data, that can speak to the same way that you can make business flows and make businesses which have the highest value of potential return, as opposed to investing in specific already existing businesses, by taking that same knowledge and applying it to being able to connect demand to supply, by being able to predict and have more predictability and have better predictability of understanding the market flow of certain markets and certain market behavior and trend behavior and buying behavior of humans, to be able to use that manipulation of that data for the better, greater purpose of encapsulating your own market around your own process and making your own market and making your own market process, where you're then therefore able to pipe that specific and make that avenue of that market demand to be able to flow in a specific avenue, so that you can capitalize on that specific process that you decide to focus on after some concentration and focus and research, to be able to then try to capitalize on that process as a business, as energy flow, as a business, that you make your own little process for that energy flow to be able to flow through and have efficient processes and efficient people holding all that energy flow in place, more or less. So you've got that as a functional and efficient process, brand, and service to be able to offer more value to the world and more philanthropy to the world and more philanthropy to the global philanthropy energy grid. Yeah. And this podcast, as always, is sponsored by fostering shelter animals and clearing the animal shelters. Fostering animals and clearing the animal shelters, because animals are seriously their guidance. They are guides. They are guides in the markets. They are guides in the spirit realm. They are guides in spiritual finance, so they can guide you to trade better. They can guide you to trade in life better, because their noses, they can be hired as healers, and healers to be able to shed light on markets and market demand, because their noses, like, they can sense water in the ground, for example, like things of that nature. They can sense assets to a certain extent if you align with a dog or a cat. So clear the animal shelters, foster animals, shelter animals, because they can help in the game of trading. They can help in the game of trading to be able to spot trades and be able to become more efficient in trading in the smaller and larger scale processes and markets, in essence, by being able to try to recognize and try to go and flow and coincide with the flow of market demand, energy flow, to be able to make trades before you are trying to conceptualize that certain essences of certain private market information will take place, because you studied it for long enough and studied the flow of that energy for long enough to try to be able to make an understanding of how the flow of that energy is going. And you're not exactly trying to predict the future, but you're trying to conceptualize that it's repeating from the past because it's been tested and proven, hopefully and conceptually, like on a consistent basis, so to speak. And that's all for now. Thanks again for now. Ding Tech by Peace by. Ding Tech Change for Games. Ding Tech Change for Game Studios. My kids, yeah. Thanks again by Peace by. Ding Tech Change for Games. Ding Tech Change for Game Studios. Thanks again by Peace by.